Hey, this is Mr. Mitchell with a video on the Pit and the Pendulum with some literary analysis of the story. We've read the story in class and I want to dig a little bit deeper here. So you have your note page, and every time there is a dash, that's when you take notes. And the first dash appears on this slide. Edgar Allan Poe really wants to remind us that this is supposed to be a scary story. He mentions the word horror 13 times in the story. We're reminded all the time that this is supposed to be a horror type short story. So, an interesting thing about a horror story or a horror film is that sometimes you don't have to have the actual bad things happen. For example, and the next dash, there is no actual blood, there's no actual gore, and no one dies in the story. It's all about the threat or the possibility of someone being hurt, of someone dying. I guess the worst part was outside of the first actual thing that happened were the rats nibbling at the narrator as he was letting them on top of him. But that's really about the grossest part of it. There was really nothing that his life was at threat in every given moment, but it's always about that threat, which actually seems to make this more horrifying than the shedding of blood. Next dash. And you take a look, neither a pit nor a pendulum are necessarily that dangerous. A pit's just something that's dug out. Pendulum is something that swings back and forth. But Edgar Allan Poe uses these to make it more horrifying. He makes the pit a deadly hole. He put a big blade on the pendulum, and then they become frightening. When the reader finds out of the danger of the pit, they can then anticipate upcoming danger of something like a pendulum or whatever else happens to come into the story. Next point. Father Time's possessions are combined in the pendulum. Now, where did we see Father Time in here? The narrator looks up to see the pendulum coming from a picture of Father Time on the wall. Father Time depictions usually involve an old man holding a timekeeping device, as you can see some of my pictures here, like an hourglass, and a scythe, which is like a blade. And you can see the examples here have that too. Kind of like the modern day Grim Reaper, someone holding a scythe ready for death to come, and the time just a reminder about the upcoming death. So these two possessions of Father Time, the hourglass and the scythe, are combined in the pendulum. It not only tracks the time by going back and forth, it is meant to kill him. How about some writing observations? The first dash, well, you can see two dashes here. The first one is there's repetition in sick to death. In fact, I think that's one of the first sentences in the entire story, is that the reader is sick to death. By doubly emphasizing the word sick, Poe makes it clear exactly how the narrator feels in the sentence, better than it would have been had he just said it once. Remember, horror was mentioned multiple times. When things are mentioned more often, the author is trying to get us to think about those. The second dash here, the word down starts 3 straight paragraphs. Down, steadily it crept. Down, certainly, relentlessly down. Down, still unceasing, still inevitably down. And these were 3 short paragraphs. You may remember us reading them in class. He's reinforcing that this guy who is about to die is going farther down. Kind of the symbolism that you'll see later on in the story of the pit symbolizing hell. Another dash. Every once in a while, Poe throws in alliterations, and you may remember from The Raven, and you may remember from other things that we've read of Poe's. He uses those alliterations. Here you've got the pit and the Pendulum right off the bat in the story title. You have an alliteration. I think one of the ones I like toward the end is the veracity of the vermin. And that's just so very much Poe to use these alliterations. But this particular story, he does a good job with the next dash, sensory images. And the example I'm going to use here is with the pendulum, but it's not just with the pendulum. The things that are most real to us are things we can see and hear and smell and taste and touch. And Poe fills the story with these sensory words, phrases, and images. The pendulum, he sees the pendulum first. Later on, he hears it hissing as it goes by. And as it gets really close, he feels the vibration of it. He feels the vibration as it gets near. And he even smells the acrid breath of the pendulum. Not only did Poe just say he saw the pendulum, but he used all these details that have to use with our senses. And that is not just with the pendulum. That's with several things throughout the story, like the rats and like the pit itself. Now let's kind of switch gears and talk about the history and the biblical significance that you find in here. Let's first do the history. First dash says, the Spanish Inquisition involved religious persecution. You guys had a little bit in class on that last week about what the Spanish Inquisition was. Long story short, in Spain at the time, if you were not Catholic, you were subject to torture, and you had to prove that you were of the Catholic faith. We don't know the crime, but we know the narrator is probably being punished for a crime of not being the preferred religion here. And you can see that he really doesn't dwell too much on the religion here, but he dwells he uses the backdrop, uses it more of a backdrop than he does an accurate representation. And one reason you can see that is that you had inaccurate methods of torture, inaccurate torture methods in the cell. The Spanish Inquisition wasn't really known to use pits and swinging blades. History has it noted that they have more stuff like an apparatus to stretch out the body and some form of water torture. I don't know what's happening here, but it looks like water is being flooded into this person's mouth. So he didn't really do the accuracies of the torture methods, but he used it in kind of more medieval type tortures. Also, we had the French, La Salle, and Toledo. How accurate was it that the French saved him, that there was a General La Salle that saved him, and that he was in Toledo, Spain? Well, the French did end the Inquisition. The person on the horse here is supposed to be Napoleon. Napoleon's brother took over Spain about the early 1800s or late 1700s and kind of gradually phased out the Inquisition type tactics. There was indeed a General Antoine Charles Louis de La Salle, and there he is right in the middle of this particular slide. He was an actual person. And there was a town, or I guess there still is a town called Toledo, Spain. However, La Salle did not free any prisoners in Toledo, Spain. It's just a figure from that era that Poe just used because it was a figure from that era. So he's not really looking for accuracy. He's just using this as a backdrop. Another dash is more of a religious or biblical significance here. There's not much biblical in this story, but Poe does have references in the pit and from the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation is the last book in the Bible. First of all, the pit symbolizes hell, and more than just being the death pit down below. In fact, the narrator even says that the pit was like hell. And after all, those doing the torturing think that the narrator probably goes to hell for his unbelief. And I guess they're trying to send him there more quickly. Oh, the demon rat eyes only add to the effect, by the way. Some of the last slides, one of them is, talking about the book of Revelation. There were candles in the book of Revelation right at the beginning. Starting in that book, there are candles that burn brightly around a man who resembles Jesus, who is to judge the world. And in the story, the judges that sentence the narrator to death are symbolized by candles who come to save or to judge whoever they are in front of. And finally, in the book of Revelation, you have trumpets that end the book of Revelation. It started with candles and ended with trumpets. And while General LaSalle was saving the narrator, you could hear trumpets in the background. Now, why would you choose to hear trumpets in the background unless you were making some kind of parallel? In this case, it's with the book of Revelation, and it signaled the salvation of the narrator. Hey, I hope you've found some of this interesting. Thank you. Bye-bye.